Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar. Certainly, this is a really critical and timely topic. As we know, this has been quite a bit of a lot of conversation around customer experience, certainly, it's as we're starting to engage our clients around the world, this is now a topic of choice, top of mind for a lot of CMO, CFO, and CEO out there. So certainly, thank you so much for your time today. We're going to spend some time drilling down into what it means for customer experience. So as you know, this is fairly a straightforward fact now that after 3 years of COVID-19 pandemic, we understand how the world has been upended and shift more towards digital engagement. But McKinsey and company found that the process of consumer engaging with the brands has been accelerated by 3 years, right? So all the interaction now, rather than people going to a branch or going to the store, all of that interaction is now shifted online. But all those, we all been living through the pandemic, and we understand that the shift to digital, and McKinsey confirmed that, actually it's been accelerated by 3 years. But let's start thinking about what does that mean for the enterprise. Let's go behind the screen and really look at 4 different functional areas of any enterprises. So now that the bulk of the revenue and the interaction now shifted online, the e-commerce or the digital channel teams really under a lot more pressure to improve the conversion rate, because that's going to be one of the key strategic main ways that enterprise will engage with new customers and booking revenues and continue to drive growth. So the e-commerce, the digital channel is going to be really key. So there's more pressure on that team. Similarly, with the marketing department, there's a lot more pressure on increasing campaign performance, especially around digital campaign, right? So the ROI for marketing spend will be more scrutinized as we move forward. And in the same time, it actually put more pressure on the customer support organization to reduce the cost to serve. Because as more and more consumers transition to online digital interaction, the support model actually is getting more complex by the day. And then behind all of that, the IT DevOps, they have to continue to support the organization across the commerce, the marketing, and the customer support, and while maintaining at the same level of budget. So the needs to reduce the cost of support is tremendous. Okay. So as the world moving towards the digital channel, that's what it means behind the scene for all the functional organization. So let's kind of peel the onions and look at it and really understand what does it mean when a company goes through digital transformation, and primarily ultimately the first project that these digital transformation taking place is focusing on the digital customer experience. And from our engagement with our customer globally, there's a huge misconception out there, and that's one of the key reasons why we want to do this webinar, is that a lot of time our customers equating customer experience, digital customer experience, to session replay tools. And there's just so much more than that, right? So there's 5 key areas that you really need to pay attention to when you go through embedding customer experience vendors and solutions for your organization. Those 5 key areas are, what kind of data is that tool capturing? So it needs to go beyond the clicks. There's just so much happening beyond just where people click, right? So there's hover, there's screen size change, there's change events, there's API calls, right? So we're going to go into more detail around that. That's number 1. Number 2, behavior patterns. If someone walk into a branch, conduct a transaction, or walk into a store conducting transaction, you can observe their behaviors. It's not just discrete interaction, right? So how do you link discrete interaction into behavior patterns? That's the number 2 that you really need to understand and drill down. And then number three is that once you're able to establish the behavior patterns, then how can you surface insights around behavior patterns? And the really cool things with this is that once you're able to understand the behavior, you can ask questions like, why didn't they do a certain thing? So now you can actually gain insights on things that did not occur. That's really cool, right? And then number four is once you understand and once you uncover a new anomalies, a new event that you can start tracking, you want to be able to track that event immediately rather than waiting 2 weeks, 3 weeks down the line. And we'll go into more details around that. And the fifth area that you really need to understand is that customer experience has broad implication across the enterprise. So therefore, you need a common set of data that all departments can gain knowledge and insights from so that everyone is speaking the same language across the organization. Those are the 5 key areas. So let's continue and drill down on this, right? So the first one is that it's fairly obvious, but it seems like we need to repeat this periodically to our customers out there, is that replay tool, certainly there are use cases for replay tools, right? So that the UI UX team, when they go through trying to release a new product, they want to see how it's operating in the wild, right? So certainly there's some extent to that, right? But if you have hundreds of thousands of sessions, which one are you going to replay? So replaying really is a very, very small subset of use cases for customer experience, right? So if you have hundreds of thousands of sessions, which one are you going to replay? How many, once you understand there's a problem, there's an issue that you want to track, then the next question is that how many users was affected by that issue, right? And ultimately, what was the business impact of that? Right, so without the analytics behind the replay, really the tool only give you a very, very small subset of use case and value that you can derive from it. Okay. So let's dive to number one. What kind of data can the tool capture? So we call this topic beyond the clicks because there are a lot of tools out there. The web analytics tool, the Adobe and the Google analytics of the world, they do a really good job at understanding where people click, what's going on your website, digital properties, and all of that. But then there's a huge chunk of data that's being missed by the replay tools and the web analytics tool. That is the internal business processes data and external business process data. So there's a lot of tools. The replay tools do a good job at capturing the visible elements, right? So the graphics, the buttons, and things like that. But for the non-visible elements of the interaction between the web browser and the server, so things like internal business processes. If you go to an e-commerce site and you search for a certain item, and there's a table or the ERP integration actually pull the inventory and display the inventory, that is all that API calls behind the scenes, that's non-visible. And there's tons of data going back and forth between the browser and the server, right? So if you truly want to understand what is happening, all the driving the behavior of the consumer, you need to have those data too. Now, it's even more complex than that because a lot of the websites out there, web apps out there are now having external business process, right? So what that means is that let's say if you go and you apply for an auto insurance policy and you enter in your VIN number, right? The VIN number lookup actually is an external process. So that means that the insurance company actually have a contract with a third-party vendor, and they send you a VIN number to validate that it's the real car, right? And there's a round trip time and all of that. So those are non-visible elements. And if you're not capturing those elements, then you're missing a big chunk of data that's going to drive the behavior of the consumer on your site. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is that behavior pattern. The cool thing with this is that we, as human beings, we behave in a certain pattern. It's not just this discrete interaction. We are not machine-to-machine integration, right? So the example here is that, for instance, like for banking, the interaction on the website is that if someone trying to log in 3 times, and the 3rd time we're able to log into the account, okay? If you're just looking at discrete interaction, that by itself may not raise alarm because, we forget our password, right? So I forget my password sometime, and I got to go and try to remember what was the password I last updated with, right? And then the next thing the user did was to change the email address of notification. By itself, discrete interaction, that's not a big deal because a lot of time, for me anyway, I like to use my work email for my banking, for instance. It might not be a good practice, but then if I have a new job, then I need to go change my email notification, right? And the third thing the users do is that they would go through and they wire money externally. And again, discrete interaction, that may not be a problem because that's my money. I need to use it to pay my contractor for work on the house, right? So large sum. So it's not a problem. But if you're able to link those together into a behavior pattern, this is clearly potentially a fraud session, right? So that's the key difference is that by looking at individual interaction versus linking them together, you now can gain higher level of insight about that behavior. Right. And then not only that, once you're able to identify that potentially this is a fraudulent session, well, you need to have the ability to actually alert around that so you can take action. Right? So that's the difference. Now let's flip it on to the e-commerce side, the retailer side. Right? So the most common struggle we see out there is a promotional code error. But if you look at individual interaction, again, if I enter promotional code and I get the error, I say, okay, maybe the first time I entered wrong. So let me try it again. So I try again and I continue to get the error. So the second time I say, maybe it didn't go through, right? And the third time I try and I get the error. So by this time I'm completely frustrated because I know that I have the right promotional code. I received the email and I know I'm looking at it and I enter the correct one, right? So by looking at discrete, these are just 3 individual fail attempts, right? But if you're able to link them together and say, this is a struggle behavior patterns, there are things that you can do about it, right? So you can alert or say, hey, there's a problem with promotional code. Let's go look into it and say why that is. And also, it gives you the chance to do a reach out campaign, say, we apologize for struggle, please come back and visit us, right? So it gives you the ability to proactively manage your online businesses, okay? So that's why behavior pattern is so important. The next point is really cool, is that the behavior patterns give you the ability to say that, why didn't people follow my golden path? Right. So as a web designer, as the UI UX designer, you laid out a really nicely journey of the consumer that they can go through from actually discovering your brand, receiving the email, click on the email, come to the landing site, selecting the product, put the product in the cart, and put promotional code, put credit card, and check out. Right? So that's really its journey. But then why is it that people went from A to B, but did not click that button, checkout button, did not complete the last step, which is C, right? But then you can actually say, you need to have the ability to say, give me the segment of all the users that went through all the way through from A to B, but then did not complete the transaction, the C step, right? So because that will give you a chance to understand what could have happened. And by looking at this, and you can also uncover the total segment of users that didn't complete, the dollars in the cart, so the value, the business impact of the reason why they didn't complete, right? You certainly can inspect the segment by replay 1 or 2 sessions, right? And look at it and uncover the fact that they didn't complete C, but they went to either Z or Y. An example is this, that once I click on the link on email, I come to the landing page, I put the product in the cart, and I'm about to check out. But then when I stopped and I went to a search box and I searched for something else, that's a struggle, right? So then by looking at that, you can realize that, hey, why is it that they need to go search for Z? Or maybe when they went to ready for checkout, they actually go completely outside of the process and start browsing in other categories. Why is that, right? So the key thing is that with the behavior patterns, now you can put some rules around it so that you can surface insights around behaviors that you anticipated to have happened but did not happen, right? So then therefore, during that process, you can uncover unknowns about the processes that the consumer went through, okay? Now, so the next logical step is that once you uncover the unknown, there's an issue, there's a reason why people went from A to B and then jump to Z rather than complete the checkout and go to C, right? So you need a tool that's able to give you the ability to pivot right away and say, I want to start tracking the segment of customers, users that went from A to B and Z. Because I want to understand what was the impact, why is that, and what would I do, and how big is that population before I react to it, right? So you need a tool to be able to do that right away, rather than go through and change the JavaScript, redeploy the JavaScript on the QA environment, and engage with the InfoSec team, and go through performance testing before promoting to production environment and start tracking that pattern, right? By then, depending on the size of the organization, it could be 2 weeks or 3 weeks time lapse. And then how realistic or how valid it is, the insight that you're going to be uncovering after that period of time, okay? And then the last point there, the fifth point, is that you need the data, the set of data that you can provide the same visibility across the organization. And this is where HCL Discover comes in, right? So the way we deliver values across the enterprise is that we actually capture the actual web and mobile digital customer interaction. Now, this is the actual presentation that the user actually sees, right? Including any personalization engines, content personalization, product personalization, right? So the next thing we do after we capture that data is that we have on the server side, eventing engine. This is where we do all the indexing, the organizing, the analyzing, surfacing insight, and really focusing on qualitative and quantitative analytics, right? And this eventing engine is very unique in the industry. This is what gives you the ability to pivot right away to start tracking anomalies that you uncover, right? Without actually going through and changing the JavaScript and all of that. And then we're not stopping there, right? So once we understand that, then we understand that there are 4 different personas within the enterprise, 4 different functional areas within the enterprise that we provide values to, right? So the first one is e-commerce or the product team, right? So for the bank, it would be the digital channel team or digital product team also, right? So there's we're talking about improving the conversion rate because we automatically surface potential struggle and pinpoint exactly where the problems are so they can fix it right away, so improve the conversion rate. On top of that, we actually can provide the e-commerce and product team the ability to quantify the business impact of each issue. Now that's huge because, as you know, if you go to the IT organization and say, "Hey, there's a problem on our website, can you help?" Well, first of all, they say, "Well, we have 20 high priorities projects, and so for you, can you wait until next week or the week after, right?" So that's number one. Number two is that if they're able to take it on, if you're able to convince them to take it on, then it's going to take them quite a bit of time to go through and problem discoveries and all of that, right? So with having the business impact as part of the issue, now you smooth out that conversation, and then you say, okay, for the last 8 hours, this problem caused abandonment of $200,000 US dollar, right? So where is that in your order of priority? It removes the emotion from the conversation and allows you to work. You have a better working relationship with the IT and DevOps, right? And then there's also, we automatically identify the struggle so we can alert around that, right? So then therefore it gives the e-commerce and the product team the ability to proactively managing their online business. Okay, so that's one. The second one is marketing. The cool thing is that the way we capture data, we capture all interaction of every customer every time, right? Unlike the web analytics tools that the marketing departments use, right? So I mentioned Adobe and Google, Adobe Analytics and Google Analytics. They are great tools, but what happened is that they require a very specific tag on each element that they want to track. So tagging, right? So without tag, they would not know if anyone clicked on that element. So therefore, it's really focused on the checkout funnel. Right? So the deployment model for web analytics is that once you selected a product and put it in a cart, they know everything there's to know about what you do from that point on. Okay. Now, but there's a chunk of interaction before you enter the checkout funnel, which is the browsing behavior. Because a lot of time, for instance, like the e-commerce, the each retailers out there, the number of SKUs can be tens of thousands. They cannot actually track, they cannot really tag each individual elements around that. It would be very, very expensive for them. So then that's the chunk of browsing behavior that the CMO and the VP of marketing do not have access to. With Discover, the way we capture data is that we capture all interaction, including browsing behavior before the consumer enter into the checkout funnel. So then that browsing behavior now can be added to their segmentation tools, right? So the CDPs or anything else like that gives them that extra insight in terms of how to do the right targeting for their customer profiles. Okay, very, very powerful. Obviously, we can also provide heat maps, link analytics, and form analytics. And we can actually, once we uncover a struggle, we can send that segment back to the marketing department for them to actually execute on the save campaign, right? So the value for the marketing department is quite tremendous. Customer support is the other one. Right? So this is where if you call into a call center, let's say if you're engaging in a retailer and you really want that promotion, so you really want that item, and if you struggle with it, then you would pick up the phone and call in. Now it's a very small percentage of us that would do that, right? So I would only call in to a brand that I'm engaging with if it's like my bank, because they have my money, I have to call in, right? So otherwise I would just move on, right? But let's say if they call in, then the customer service representative most likely would have a list of questions that they go through. What browser version are you using? Are you on 3G Wi-Fi? What we're trying to do, on and on and on and on. So basically, the customer support rep making the consumer relive a very bad experience. Okay, so with a tool with Discover, then they actually can look at that session, the live session, and see all the all the environmental variables. So none of the questions are needed, right? So they understand right away what browser version, if I'm on my phone or on my desktop or laptop, and any of that. So they actually can spend time zero in on helping the consumer completing the transaction, right? So again, it's reducing first call resolution time, so therefore cost saving. And if you're able to resolve the issue during the first call, then there's no need for escalation. Again, that's cost saving. Okay, and then the next area, functional department is IT DevOps. This is where they have access to a robust set of session data, so completed with visible element, all the business, the internal processes and external processes, all the API all the API calls, right? So as I mentioned before, so with that data, they actually can zero in on where the problems are and reduce 90% of problem discovery time, 90%. So again, it's a cost saving. They can set alerts on the level of struggle, so they actually can get notification right away before even the product team have to call into the IT, right? And it's observability is a big word right now. So we're able to link from the browser all the way back to the APM tools, right? So the servers and the network availabilities and things like that also. Now, we are not done. The last bucket there is data export. Now, this is really cool. So we believe from Discover standpoint, HCL Discover standpoint, is that your data is your data. You need to be able to use it the way you want to, right? So we do not charge for more data exports and all of that. A lot of our customers use our data for further downstream analytics. So such as populating, I mentioned before, CDP and data lake. And a lot of times they actually use that data for fraud forensic. Really cool use case. That's probably deserve a separate webinar altogether, but we don't have enough time here. But just to know that because of the behavior pattern, we actually can now provide fraud scoring for session. That's really cool because that's a certain behavior. A quick example I mentioned before is that I try to log in, I change my email, and then I wire externally. If you link that together, that's a really high fraud score session, right? The other one that's really straightforward is that if you credit card application, if you're able to fill the credit card application under 3 seconds, right? That's clearly a bot, right? It's not a humanly, physically impossible to do. So those are the really low-hanging fruits, but there's more complex use cases around for that. Okay, all right. So that's the fifth one, is that one set of data that provide values across the enterprise, right? So that why is it that it's so important? This is something that we spend a lot of time talking to our customers about. Why is it that customer experience, digital customer experience is so important, and it should be something that's top of mind for all the C-suites, right? So the conversation goes like this, that you know how to manage your business, and you have KPIs, you have tools that give you the ability to do that. So things like if you're hitting into a new campaign and then your conversion rate is low, you have a tool that monitor that. So you know that your conversion rate is not performing right? So you know. If you miss your business goals, you know that you're measuring your revenue, maybe on the weekly basis, maybe on the monthly basis, but absolutely quarterly basis, right? So if you miss your business goals, you know right away, okay? If you suddenly have a spike in incoming calls to your call center, high cost to serve, you know that right away, right? But there are things underneath the water, underneath the line, the unknown. That really is what's keeping the CEO, the CMO, CFO up late at night. So things like decreased lifetime customer values, right? So there's no way to measure that, right? And if you as a consumer, you know, if you like the initial promotion and you come and you engage with that brand and you purchase, but if you try to go back and repeat your business, and if you don't have good experience, you run into promotional code error, you run into different UI challenges, and all of that. Over time, you would have a very negative view of that brand, right? So what that means is that you now will opt not likely to repeat the business. Okay, so decrease lifetime customer value, right? And then if you as an enterprise, do not have a strong brand, right? So that you would have to do more outbound marketing campaigns in order to get new customers. That would increase your customer acquisition cost, right? So the more campaign you do, the higher the cost it would be. Deteriorating margins, right? So I had this conversation with a CMO, and she stopped me and said, "Wait a minute, I'm in marketing. Why are you talking to me about margin?" And I said, "Well, if you don't have a strong brand, what do you have to do in order to get new customer beyond just do a lot of marketing, right? So you have to offer discount on your product, and that eats into your margin. And ultimately, if it continues and if you don't fix the customer experience issue underneath the line, then ultimately there's a long-term brand damage, and you cannot recover from that, right? So in the U.S., there's many brands, as you know, that was the dominant brands, I would say 6-7 years ago, and now it's nowhere to be seen, right? So you can think of a handful out there, right? So the ones jumping out is things like Sears, like Blockbusters, and Kmart's and things like that, right? So there's lots of examples like that. Right? So the idea, the key here is that you need to take care of customer experience, because over time there's a tipping point. If you do not take care of the customer experience, then there's a tipping point where it's too late for you to recover from. And now with the world's moving to digital interaction, right? So digital customer experience is the area that you need to focus in terms of making investment. Okay, so I want to leave you with this, that we have a tool, HCL Discover, actually complete checkbox all the 5 key points that I went over today, right? So but at a high level, it will give you the ability to protect your brand, right? So understand right away if someone struggles, and give you the ability to proactively react to that right away, right? At the same time, reduce the customer service burden, right? Give you the ability to shorten the first call resolution time. Minimize IT dependency. You can now help IT with quantify the business impact so they can prioritize and give them the ability to pinpoint where the problems are so that they don't have a long cycle of replicating the problems, right? Eliminating customer experience. Right? If you do all of this, the customer would have a better experience when they're engaging with your brand, and then ultimately detect and prevent harm. Okay? So I just want to make sure that we cover those key items. And at this point, maybe, Amanda, we can open up for Q&A. I'm not sure if there's any questions in the chat at all.
Yeah, we have one question that we kind of just answered to Joe about a competitive product, and he got that update. But for the audience, we did get another question. What's the difference between web analytics and what Discover does?
So the web analytics are the solution that actually have to tag the individual elements, right? So what that means is that if you can think about it, like in the US, we have this thing called speed camera, right? So we all hate speed camera. And if you think about it, someone would have to say, there's a problem in this intersection, so I'm going to make investment. I'm going to hire 2 guys, buy 2 cameras, climb the ladder, and connecting the camera to the network and start monitoring traffic at that intersection. That's tagging, right? So you say, for web analytics, I want to start tracking the interaction at for this one element. I put a tag next to it. So the problem is that what happened when speeding takes place where there's no speed camera? Would you know about it? You would not, right? So that's same thing as tagging for web analytics. If you don't tag the elements, you would not know if someone clicked on it at all, right? So would not know. Whereas Discover is like the next generation satellite. We capture the traffic holistically across all regions. And then after the fact, you can ask Discover, say, Discover, give me the area where speeding took place, and we pull out that segment. We can also say, here is one guy that was speeding the most. This is his license plate, and go get him. So we give you the ability to proactively understand and analyze your traffic without requiring tagging of the individual elements, right? So the benefits are many, right? So the very first one is that when you tag with web analytics, and when you go through and you make a change to your website, you have to make sure that all your tags are fired properly and still valid. So that's why they have this thing called Tag Manager that manages all of that, right? Whereas for Discover, you don't have to do any of that, right? So we capture data globally, so you don't have to actually change our JavaScript whenever you update the website. Now, let me be very clear. We are not competing against web analytics. We are not competing against the Adobe and the Google of the world, right? They are great at providing what is going on your website and digital properties. We provide the reason why things happen, right? So it's really complementary. 100% of our customers have both. They have web analytics, either Adobe or Google, and they also have Discover.
What about performance? Does it impact website?
So guys, the basic way you capture data here is with a UI include, and so it's a great question. The library itself is designed, of course, to be very innocuous. And you'll find that in a general sense, it doesn't make any difference to the web, but there's always a little bit of a testing effort because it does qualify as a code change. So that's a great question. It's not something we worry about, but it's something you address during the implementation process.